For those of you that are watching one of my videos for the first time, I'm currently out in Thailand, a place called Pattaya, and I'm taking care of my dad, who's been in hospital since the end of March, and coming towards the final stages of that stay. And he has a terminal illness, so we've been caring for him in the hospital whilst his condition has been slowly declining, which carries with it its own set of challenges, which I've gone into in other videos. But as it approaches the later stages, and as we come towards the final moments, as hard as it is to acknowledge at times, that's the situation we find ourselves in as we move towards that. There is a large period of time where we know what's coming next, we know what the next stage of progression looks like, and we don't know when. And so there is a lull, if you like. A bit like knowing that a storm is coming and you can see it on the horizon, but you don't necessarily know how fast the wind is blowing it towards you. But you know at some point it's going to land, so you have to prepare yourself for it. And I suppose over the last few weeks that I've been here, I've had the time to do so, and I've seen the progression of his condition gradually to a point where we are now. And that carries with it, again, its own challenges and grief, and coming to terms with the loss of someone that you care about is a part of that, but also a celebration of being able to spend time with someone that you care about and to meet their needs when they're unable to do that for themselves. And I think there's an enormous blessing in that, and I'm very thankful that I've had the opportunity to do that, and I'll carry that with me for a very long time. And in these final stages, there is a waiting, there is an anticipation, there is a time where, certainly for the last 2 weeks or thereabouts, there hasn't really been a huge amount we can do, aside from occasionally take care of his comfort, being in a hospital bed, and just administering the various personal care needs that one has when they're in that position. When we're not doing that, essentially we're in the room, we're with him, and he's sleeping most of the time, so it's not like we're having an active conversation. And in previous years, previous points in my life, I would have noticed, I wouldn't have noticed it, I probably would have just done it. I'd have been anywhere else but that room, anywhere else but wanting to see the reality of what's unfolding before me, silently, slowly. And I'd have done anything I can to avoid that. And that can take any form. For me, it would be like eating, listening to music, reading, watching things on the internet. But this experience for me is so important, because it's not one I'm ever likely to repeat, certainly in this unusual set of circumstances. But I want to honor it as much as I can. And so that waiting for me is, I see it as an invitation. I see it as an invitation to notice these things. And I've been on, however you would describe it, as a spiritual path for probably about 10 or 15 years. I don't know exactly how long, to be honest. But let's call it a path of self-discovery. And on that path of self-discovery, the only thing really that I have learned is that the mind isn't all there is. There is something beneath that. You can call it the higher mind or the greater mind, and it's not the mind that necessarily thinks, it's the silence from which thoughts arise. And in the absence of having things to do, there is always an invitation to connect to that. And so whilst I find myself with 7 or 8 or 9 hours a day of space in that hospital room, that's exactly the thing I've been doing. And in that space, I've been able to observe the many threads that the mind has woven to try and escape the moment and the many ways that I have unconsciously over the years taken the path out of discomfort. And discomfort can look like anything. It can just be the discomfort of the moment, which is the directness of it, but also it's the resistance to what's happening. And in a situation like this, I would say many people would probably think to themselves, well, this shouldn't be happening. It shouldn't be happening to him. Why him? You know, so unfortunate. Oh, it's such a poor set of circumstances. And I could think that, but it doesn't help the situation. The reality is, it's happening. Anything else I add to that is subjective and will shape my experience accordingly. And so I've done my best to not do so. And of course, at times it's hard to see someone going through that transition of declining in health. And that comes, as I say, with its own challenges. But I'm feeling the discomfort as it arises rather than compartmentalizing it and putting it into a box to open at a later date, because that's never a good thing. And as uncomfortable as the moment is, when there is that space, there is an opportunity to see things as they arise and to see them for what they are, which is movements of energy or thoughts which suggest in some way that this moment is insufficient or lacking or defective. There's something wrong with it and it needs to be fixed for me to feel better. Now, I know that's not the case most of the time, but this period of waiting is illuminating that so much more directly that I can't possibly avoid it. And this is a large reason why people go to ashrams, to yoga centers. I mean, like real yoga centers, not just for the postures, but for the depth of yoga, to experience what lies beyond the mind, or to see that what they are is what lies beyond the mind. Because in these places there is an absence of distraction, there is an absence of convenience, there is an absence of pleasure. And I'm sure to many of you watching that sounds like madness. But that's precisely why I'm engaged in the practice, because I observe that the mind attributes almost a sense of disgust to anything that doesn't carry with it the promise of a reward. And over the years, I've struggled a lot with patience. Patience is something I really have found hard, and this has been an enormous test of patience. As I mentioned, knowing what's coming but not knowing when. That indefinite period of waiting. In the absence of patience, all I can do is suffer. All I can do is I can go mad. I can find anything I could possibly want to do to take myself out of that moment. But how is that a sustainable way to live? And on top of that, energy then, attention, becomes fragmented. It starts to move in lots of different directions. And when attention starts to move in lots of different directions, the ability to concentrate on anything meaningful for a sustained period of time also diminishes. And so whilst the immediate benefit may not be apparent, there are many other benefits which emerge more clearly as time goes on and as the practice deepens. And it's been a very interesting revelation for me to see just how much objection there is, even at this point in my life where largely the experience I have is to the most extent reasonably stable. And I don't say that to brag or to make any bold claims, but that's it's a consequence, I say, of seeing beyond the mind. So when you start to see beyond the mind, it naturally becomes quieter because you are constantly feeding it with new thoughts. And there's a lot coming up which I notice, which I could follow. And to follow thoughts which come up in moments of discomfort will lead me only further towards more discomfort. And this may be an extreme version of the waiting which I mentioned. But if we tone it down and we reduce it from the situation I find myself in to being stuck in a traffic jam or waiting in line at a queue somewhere, especially at an airport where the queues are enormous, or getting into a venue, or paying for your shopping in the supermarket, all of these things involve waiting to some degree, and you can see visibly the discomfort on people's faces at having to stop moving. And on my previous video I mentioned about rest, and how rest for most of us looks like stopping the body but continuing the movement of the mind. And this cycle becomes very obvious when movement is enforced. Stillness is enforced. When you find yourself in a queue, all of a sudden there's this momentum of having been moving forward somewhere and you've stopped. And there's a resistance to that. And you can see the resistance on people's faces because often they're really frustrated and just moving around and doing anything they can to distract themselves, biting their fingernails, or these days, on their phones. When I was growing up, it was like smoking a cigarette or something like that. And that carries with it its own sense of tension, which I'm sure many of you can feel in situations as well, which is only, it seems to me, becoming more and more magnified as the world starts to become faster and faster and faster, and things become more instantaneous, and checkouts become automated, and sales processes become automated, and sat-navs give us a promise of arriving at a particular time, and everything has a time frame attached to it. Now all of a sudden we're bound to time again, and we have no opportunity to just sit and be with life as it's unfolding, independent of time. And it's very unfortunate because when we get sick, when we find ourselves in positions where we can't move forwards as much as we would like to, then the momentum can only carry forward in one place, which is up here. And that's been largely my experience of being in the hospital, is just noticing how much of that momentum there is. And just allowing it to be there without trying to change it. And this is the thing, this isn't about getting a result. This isn't about looking at something so that something else can happen. It's observing something so that you can see its movement, so that you can observe how it's responding and reacting to things as they unfold in real time, so that when the next time something like that happens, it doesn't catch you out so much. And this is the value of observation in any form. You don't have to just observe your mind, you can observe anything. If I'm sitting on the beach here, and it's not the nicest beach I've ever been to, so I hesitate to show it to you, I have to be honest. But if I sit here for long enough, I'll observe the movement of the tides. And I heard something recently about modern agriculture and the advance in modern agriculture. I say modern, let's say over the last few thousand years. The biggest advance was when humans noticed the seasons. And they noticed that at different times of the year, the weather would be different. And that's an observation. It's a process of observation. So if we can observe ourselves similarly, see the nature of our minds, see how it starts to respond to things and become attached to things and become fixed in its ways, but also moments when it becomes curious. moments when it starts to open, things change. Then that's true understanding, because we're observing the mind from a deeper place. How does that relate to patience? Well, it relates to patience because you start to notice those thoughts. You start to notice that discomfort in the body. You start to become aware of the movement of energy in various directions and the preferences you may hold and the visions you have of pushing the person in the queue in front of you out of the way so that you can get to the checkout faster. All of these things, you start to see them with a degree of detachment, but also there's a kind of humor to it as well, because you stop taking it so seriously. And I feel most of us really struggle because we take what's in our mind seriously. In fact, we take it to be true. And that's the worst thing we can do, because it's not. It's apparent. So my invitation for you, if you're struggling with patience, with waiting, especially if you're in a position where you don't have a choice, where you can't move forwards, either because you're bedbound and you're sick, or you might be stuck in a traffic jam, you might be waiting for your promotion at work, you might be waiting to hear back from someone you went on a date with, and that anticipation is like, it's just eating away at you. Just observe it, look at it, see how it moves, notice how strong it feels and where it arises in the body when those thoughts come. And don't make any effort to change them. I'm not suggesting there's anything you have to do about this. It starts with observation, and awareness is always the first step to change. When we become aware of things, we stop becoming troubled by them because we see them with a degree of detachment. And in those moments, when they arise again, we can be with them without the preference to change them, without the discomfort, or perhaps even with the discomfort, but being okay with that. And that is entirely possible. And it's a much easier, simpler, considerably less stressful way to live. And take it small steps. You don't have to do this with the entirety of your life all at once. It's not this thing where you just turn on the light bulb one day and then all of a sudden everything is in awareness. It happens for some people, but that's not been my experience. And see what arises. Let me know in the comments. Share it with other people. Because if there's something you've noticed in the practice you've been engaging in already, in things that you've noticed about yourself, it helps others to share those things. And that's part of the reason I share these videos, because I want you to realize, if you haven't already, that there is life beyond what you think. And that life is so much more expansive and peaceful, filled with possibility than you could possibly imagine. So if there's value in this for you, then please do me a favor and let YouTube know somehow. Like, comment, all of that stuff. Because then it starts to share it with other people who may find value in it too. And I feel the more of us that we can bring together, then the less alone we feel on this path. Because sometimes the path of self-discovery is a very lonely one, because we're looking inside, not on the outside. So we're not relating with the same language and the same frame of reference that the majority of the world is. And I'd like to change that. So I'll see you on the next one.